close your eyes and drift back with me through the corridors of time, back to an age when the world was young and gods walked the earth with the same solidity as mountains, when every river held a spirit and every tree whispered secrets. We are traveling to ancient Greece, but not the Greece of marble temples and philosophical schools. Not even the Greece of warrior kings and bronze-clad heroes. We are going further back to the mythic Greece, the Greece that exists in story and dream, where the boundaries between earth and sky and underworld were both clearly defined and mysteriously permeable. This is a Greece where 12 great Olympian gods ruled from their throne atop Mount Olympus, its peak so high that clouds wreathed it perpetually, hiding it from mortal eyes. These were not distant, abstract deities. They were beings of immense power and equally immense passion, capable of great kindness and terrible wrath, given to jealousy and love and anger and joy in ways that made them simultaneously superhuman and all too human. They meddled in mortal affairs. They feuded among themselves. They loved and betrayed and forgave. And the whole cosmos reflected their moods and whims. Among these gods walked Zeus, king of the gods, lord of the sky and thunder. His word was law on Olympus and across the wide earth. His lightning bolts could shatter mountains. His voice, when raised in anger, could make the seas tremble. But Zeus had many children, born of many unions with goddesses and mortal women alike. And among his daughters was one who would come to stand at the center of one of the most profound myths the Greeks ever told. But we are not beginning with Zeus. We are beginning with his sister, Demeter. Demeter was the goddess of the harvest, of grain and growing things, of the cycle of planting and reaping that sustained human life. She was not as celebrated as some of the other Olympians. She did not have Athena's fierce wisdom or Aphrodite's intoxicating beauty or Artemis's wild independence. But in many ways, she was more fundamentally important than any of them, because without Demeter's blessing, without the grain that grew in the fields, without the harvest that filled the granaries, humanity would starve. She was the goddess who stood between mortals and famine, between life and death by hunger. The farmers knew her name better than they knew any of the other gods. They whispered prayers to her when they planted their seeds, made offerings to her at harvest time, depended on her favor for their very survival. Demeter had a daughter, a daughter born of her union with Zeus, a girl child who was the center of her world. This daughter's name was Cora, which means simply the maiden, though she would later be known by another name, a darker name, a name that spoke of her transformation and her dual nature. But for now, she was simply Cor, and to her mother, she was perfect. Imagine Cor as the Greeks imagined her, young, on the cusp of womanhood, but not quite there yet, existing in that liminal space between childhood and maturity. Her hair was long and dark, falling in waves down her back like a waterfall of night. Her eyes were bright with innocence and curiosity, knowing nothing yet of sorrow or loss or the darker aspects of existence. Her laughter was musical, bubbling up easily and often, the kind of laughter that makes others smile just to hear it. She moved with the easy grace of youth, light on her feet, energetic, full of life and possibility. Cor loved flowers. This detail is important because it would be her love of flowers that would change everything, that would set in motion events that would shake the cosmos and transform the natural world forever. She loved to wander through meadows, gathering blossoms, weaving them into crowns and garlands, delighting in their colors and their fragrances and their delicate beauty. She had her favorite companions, other divine maidens, daughters of Oceanus, the ancient titan of the world-encircling river. These girls would spend their days in innocent pleasures, dancing and singing and picking flowers, existing in a kind of eternal springtime of youth and joy. Demeter watched over her daughter with fierce protectiveness. Perhaps she sensed even then that their time together was precious, that it could not last, that forces beyond her control might one day take Cor from her. Or perhaps she was simply a mother who loved her child deeply and wanted to keep her safe and happy for as long as possible. She kept Cor close, let her roam only in places Demeter deemed safe, surrounded her with trusted companions who would keep watch over the precious girl. The world in those days was still young. The seasons, as we know them, did not yet exist in their present form. There was growing and blooming and harvesting, yes, but it all happened in a more continuous flow, a perpetual gentle cycle rather than the sharp divisions between spring and summer and autumn and winter that would come later. The earth was generous, fertile, abundant. Trees bore fruit and flowers simultaneously. The air was warm but not hot, The rains came when needed, but not in excess, and there was a sense of eternal springtime, a perpetual renewal of life constantly blossoming. This was Demeter's gift to the world, sustained by her joy in her daughter and her contentment with her role as goddess of the harvest. As long as Demeter was happy, as long as Kor danced through the meadows gathering flowers, as long as mother and daughter existed in their gentle, loving routine, the earth would continue to be generous and abundant. But there were other gods, other realms, other powers in the cosmos, and not all the gods lived in the bright sunlight of the upper world. Deep beneath the surface of the earth, far below the roots of the oldest mountains, deeper than any mine shaft or cave system could reach, there existed another world entirely. The Greeks called it Hades, though that was both the name of the place and the name of its ruler. They also called it Erebus, the place of darkness. They called it the House of Hades and the Kingdom of the Dead, and sometimes simply below. This was the Underworld, the realm where all mortals went when they died, regardless of whether they had been good or evil, brave or cowardly, rich or poor. Death was the great equalizer, and the Underworld received all souls without distinction, gathering them into its shadowy halls like a dark harvest that never ended. It was not hell, not in the way later religious traditions would conceive of hell. It was not a place of eternal torment for the wicked, though there were sections where certain exceptional sinners suffered endless punishment for their hubris and crimes against the gods. For most souls, it was simply a place of existence after life, a shadowy half-life, where they drifted as pale shadows of what they had been, deprived of the intensity and vividness of living, but still possessing consciousness, memory, identity. The geography of the Underworld was complex and strange. To enter it, one had to cross the river Styx, the river of hate, whose waters were dark and sluggish and cold beyond cold. A ferryman named Charon, ancient and hunched and grim, would pole his boat across these waters, but only for souls who had been properly buried with a coin placed in their mouth or on their eyes to pay the ferryman's fee. Those who had not been buried properly, who had no coin for Charon, were doomed to wander the shores of the Styx for 100 years before they could cross. Once across the Styx, a soul would encounter Cerberus, the monstrous three-headed hound who guarded the gates of the underworld. Cerberus was no ordinary dog. He was huge, with 3 heads that could look in 3 directions simultaneously, ensuring that no one escaped his notice. His teeth were like daggers, his bark like thunder, and his presence was meant to inspire terror. But Cerberus's role was not to keep souls out. It was to keep them in. He would let souls pass into the underworld easily enough. But woe to any soul who tried to leave, to escape back to the land of the living. Cerberus would tear such a soul apart, or at least prevent their passage. For none could pass the 3-headed guardian without the permission of the underworld's ruler. And who was this ruler? Who was the god who presided over this dark realm, who commanded the dead, who made the laws that governed the kingdom of shadows? His name was Hades, and he was one of the 3 great brothers who had divided the cosmos among themselves after overthrowing their father Cronus and the generation of titans who had ruled before them. When Zeus and his brothers drew lots to see who would rule which portion of the world, Zeus won the sky and thus became king of the gods. Poseidon won the sea and became lord of all waters. And Hades drew the underworld, the realm of the dead, the kingdom beneath the earth. It was not a prize that would have made most beings happy. The underworld was dark and dreary, far from the sunlight and the living world, removed from the festivals and celebrations of Olympus. Hades could not bask in the adoration of mortal worshippers the way Zeus could, for mortals feared to speak his name, avoided building temples to him, whispered about him only in hushed tones if they had to mention him at all. He was necessary but unloved, essential but avoided, powerful but isolated. Imagine Hades as the ancient Greeks saw him. He was not a devil or a demon, not evil in the way later religious traditions would paint lords of the underworld. He was stern and serious, grave in both senses of the word, dignified and remote. He wore dark robes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His face was neither young nor old, perhaps ageless, perhaps simply weathered by witnessing the endless procession of the dead. His eyes were dark, deep-set, knowing. They had seen every mortal come to his kingdom eventually, had witnessed every death, every ending, every final moment. These were not eyes that could be easily fooled or moved by pleading. They were the eyes of someone who understood that death was inevitable, that his role was necessary, that sentiment and mercy while not entirely absent from his character, had to be balanced against the immutable laws that governed his realm. Hades carried a bident, a two-pronged spear that was similar to his brother Poseidon's trident, but with 2 tines instead of 3. He wore the Helm of Darkness, a helmet forged by the Cyclopes during the war against the Titans, which had the power to make him invisible, to let him walk unseen among gods and mortals alike. And he sat upon a throne of dark stone in his palace, deep in the underworld, a palace that was magnificent in its own way, grand and imposing, but empty of joy, empty of light, empty of the warmth and laughter that filled the halls of Olympus. He was called by many names, most of them euphemisms, for the Greeks believed that speaking his true name too often might attract his attention, and no one wanted to attract the attention of the god of the dead. They called him Idoneus, the unseen one. They called him Polydegmon, the host of many, acknowledging that every mortal would eventually become his guest. They called him Pluton, the wealthy one, because all the precious metals and gems that lay buried in the earth technically belonged to him, and because death claimed everyone eventually, making him rich beyond measure in souls, if not in conventional wealth. But despite all his wealth, despite all his power, despite his important role in the cosmic order, Hades was lonely. His brothers had wives. Zeus was married to Hera, though his many infidelities caused constant strife. Poseidon had Amphitrite, queen of the sea. Even the other gods had companions, lovers, spouses who shared their lives and their domains. But Hades ruled alone over his dark kingdom, with only the dead for company, and the dead were not much company at all. They were shadows, remnants, memories of life rather than life itself. They could not laugh with him or share his concerns or ease his isolation. They were subjects, not companions. And so Hades was lonely, profoundly lonely, in a way that had been growing worse over the ages. His duty kept him in the underworld almost constantly. He could not often leave his realm, could not ascend to Olympus for the feasts and gatherings of the gods, because his presence was needed below to maintain order, to ensure that the dead remained dead, to prevent any breaches in the boundaries between life and death. The few times he did venture to the surface world, he made the living uncomfortable. They could sense something wrong about him, something that didn't quite fit in the world of sunlight and growth and warmth. He was an intrusion from below, a reminder of mortality in a world that preferred to forget about death, and his presence made even the gods uneasy. So he stayed below, and he ruled, and he was lonely, and he began to think about what it would mean to have a companion, someone to share the burden of ruling the underworld, someone whose presence might bring some light, some warmth, some joy into his dark kingdom. He mentioned this once to his brother Zeus during one of his rare visits to the surface world. They were alone, just the two brothers, speaking privately as they had not done in many years. Hades was not good at asking for things, not accustomed to expressing vulnerability or need, but he managed to convey his desire for a wife, a queen, to rule beside him in the underworld. Zeus understood his brother's isolation, perhaps even sympathized with it, though Zeus himself had never known loneliness, always surrounded as he was by gods and mortals who sought his attention. Zeus considered the problem. Which goddess could possibly be convinced to leave the light and beauty of the upper world to descend into the darkness of Hades' realm? Which of the gods would willingly give their daughter in marriage to the grim Lord of the Dead? It was not an easy question. And then Zeus thought of Demeter's daughter, Kor. She was young, beautiful, innocent, full of life and vitality. Perhaps, Zeus thought, she could bring some of that life into the underworld. Perhaps her youth and energy could balance Hades' seriousness and gravity. And Demeter was Zeus's sister, which meant Kor was Zeus's daughter as well, though he had not been much involved in her upbringing. He could arrange this match. He had the authority to do so as king of the gods. Did Zeus think about whether Demeter would agree to such a marriage? Did he consider whether Kor herself would want to become queen of the underworld? Perhaps he did, and dismissed these concerns, believing that as king of the gods and as Kor's father, he had the right to make such decisions. Or perhaps he simply did not think about it much at all, acting on the assumption that his will should be sufficient, that the desires of goddesses could be overruled by his divine authority. Whatever his reasoning, Zeus agreed to Hades' request. He gave his brother permission to take Kor as his wife, to bring her down to the underworld, to make her queen of the dead. This conversation happened entirely without Demeter's knowledge or consent. It happened without Kor's knowledge or consent. The decision was made between two powerful male gods, and the women involved were not consulted, were not even informed that their lives were about to change forever. And so the stage was set for what would happen next, for the abduction and the grief and the transformation that would reshape the world and establish the cycle of seasons as humanity would know them for all time afterward. The actors were in place. The invisible currents of fate were aligning. All that was needed was the right moment, the right circumstances for everything to unfold. That moment was approaching, drawing closer with each passing day, though no one yet knew it except Zeus and Hades, who were preparing to change the cosmos in ways even they might not have fully understood. The day started like any other day in that eternal springtime. The sun rose, though there were no harsh transitions between night and day in this mythic time. Just a gentle brightening of the sky, as if the world itself were slowly waking from sleep. Birds sang their morning songs, complex melodies that wove together into harmonies that seemed almost planned, almost orchestrated by some unseen conductor. Flowers opened their petals to receive the light, and their fragrances drifted on the gentle breeze, sweet and intoxicating. Kor woke in her mother's house, that place where Demeter dwelt when she was not traveling the earth, encouraging the growth of crops and blessing the farmer's fields. It was a beautiful dwelling, surrounded by gardens, where every flower bloomed in profusion, where fruit trees bore their bounty year-round, where the air always smelled of growth and life and abundance. Kor had lived her entire existence in safety and comfort, knowing nothing of danger, nothing of sorrow, nothing of the darker currents that ran through the cosmos beneath its beautiful surface. She ate a simple breakfast, perhaps some bread and honey, some fruit fresh from the garden, washing it down with clear water from the spring that never ran dry. Her mother was away that morning, tending to some matter that required her presence elsewhere. Kor felt no concern about this. She was accustomed to spending time with her companions, the daughters of Oceanus, who would be meeting her soon for another day of innocent pleasures. The girls arrived as the morning brightened further, appearing in small groups, greeting Kor with embraces and laughter and excited chatter about where they might wander today, what flowers they might find, what songs they might sing. There were many of them, perhaps dozens, young divine maidens who existed in that same space between childhood and adulthood, all of them safe, all of them happy, all of them completely unaware that this day would be different from every day that had come before. They decided to go to a particular meadow, a place they had visited before, but that always seemed to offer new delights. It was some distance from Demeter's dwelling, but not so far that it felt unsafe. The nymphs who accompanied them would keep watch, would ensure no harm came to these precious daughters of gods. What harm could there be anyway? This was the realm of the Olympians, where Zeus's power protected his family, where no monster dared intrude, where danger seemed like a concept from another world entirely. The meadow, when they reached it, was breathtaking. It stretched out before them in a riot of color. Countless flowers growing in wild profusion, varieties that rarely grew together, all blooming simultaneously in this enchanted place. There were roses, deep red and blushing pink and pure white, their petals like silk, their thorns softened by some divine influence, so they would not scratch tender divine skin. There were crocuses, purple and gold and white, pushing up through the grass like stars fallen to earth. There were violets and irises and hyacinths, their colors ranging through every shade imaginable. The air was thick with their combined fragrances, sweet and heady, almost overwhelming in its intensity. The girls scattered across the meadow, laughing and calling to each other, pointing out particularly beautiful specimens, gathering blossoms into baskets and aprons and holding them up to show off their prizes. Kor moved among them, equally delighted, her hands already full of flowers, her hair already adorned with a crown of roses and violets woven together by one of her companions. And then she saw it. At the far edge of the meadow, growing alone, separate from all the other flowers, was a Narcissus unlike any she had ever seen. It was enormous, much larger than any normal Narcissus, and it seemed to glow with an inner light, as though it were not quite real, not quite natural. The flower had not just one blossom, but 100, all growing from the same stem, all perfect, all radiating that strange, compelling luminescence. Its fragrance was so powerful, so overwhelming, that later those who told the story would say that the whole wide earth laughed at its sweetness, that even the salt swell of the sea and the sky above seemed to join in some cosmic joke that only they understood. But Kor did not hear that laughter. She knew only wonder, only desire for this impossibly beautiful thing. What she did not know What she could not know was that this flower was not natural at all. Gaia herself, the ancient earth, had grown it at Zeus's request, had crafted it as a lure, a snare, a trap designed specifically for one innocent girl picking flowers on a spring morning. The conspiracy reached to the very foundations of the cosmos. The earth itself had betrayed the daughter of the harvest goddess, had created beauty as a weapon, had made wonder into a cage. Kor began walking toward the Narcissus. Her companions were absorbed in their own flower gathering and did not immediately notice her departure. The nymphs who were supposed to be watching had turned their attention elsewhere, distracted by something, though later none of them could remember what. It was as though the world had conspired to leave Kor alone and unguarded at precisely this moment, as though all the usual protections had quietly and imperceptibly failed. She approached the miraculous Narcissus, drawn by its beauty and its scent, and something else. Something she could not name. Something that felt almost like destiny. The flower seemed to be waiting for her specifically, seemed to have bloomed just so she would find it. She had never wanted anything as much as she wanted to pick this flower, to hold it, to bring it back to her companions and show them this wonder she had discovered. Kor reached out with both hands. The Narcissus's stem was thick, requiring her to grasp it firmly and pull. For a moment, it resisted, and then suddenly it came free, the roots pulling loose from the earth with a sound like a sigh, like the world itself releasing a breath it had been holding. And everything changed. The earth beneath Kor's feet began to tremble. At first, it was subtle, just a faint vibration, but it grew quickly, becoming a shaking that made her stumble, that sent her to her knees, still clutching the miraculous Narcissus. Her companions felt it too, and looked up from their flower gathering in alarm, looking around for the source of this disturbance, beginning to move toward Kor, beginning to call out to her in concern. But they were too late. The earth before Kor split open. It did not crack or crumble, but simply opened, as though an invisible hand had drawn back a curtain or pulled open enormous doors that had been hiding beneath the grass and soil. Darkness welled up from that opening, darkness like nothing that existed in the sunlit world above. Darkness so complete and absolute that it seemed to devour the light around it, creating a void, an absence, a portal into somewhere else entirely. And from that darkness came horses. They were not ordinary horses. They were black as midnight, black as obsidian, black as the spaces between stars. And their eyes glowed with a red fire that spoke of depths and distances that mortal eyes were never meant to see. They pulled a chariot, and the chariot was made of gold and darkness woven together, magnificent and terrible at the same time, beautiful and frightening in equal measure. Standing in the chariot, holding the reins of these impossible horses, was a figure cloaked in shadows. He was tall and stern-faced and crowned with a dark circlet that might have been made of onyx, or might have been made of solidified darkness itself. His robes billowed around him as the chariot emerged from the earth, and his eyes, when they fell upon Kor, were dark and knowing, and filled with an intensity that made her freeze in place, unable to move, unable even to scream, though her mouth opened in an attempt. Hades had come for his bride. He did not speak. There was no time for words, no time for explanation or persuasion or anything civilized. He simply reached down with one strong arm as the chariot swept past Kor, and he grabbed her, pulling her up into the chariot with him with irresistible strength. She dropped the Narcissus, and it fell to the ground, where it immediately withered and vanished, as though it had never been real at all, as though it had been nothing but a lure, a trap, a trick to get her to this spot at this moment. Now Kor did scream. She screamed with all the force of her lungs, a sound of terror and confusion and betrayal and outrage. She had never been harmed before, never been frightened, never experienced anything but gentleness and safety, and this sudden violence, this abduction, this inexplicable horror shattered her world completely. She struggled in Hades' grip, but his arm around her waist was like iron, unyielding, holding her against him as he took up the reins again with his free hand. Her companions heard the scream and looked up in time to see something that would haunt them forever. They saw Kor being carried away in a chariot of gold and darkness. They saw the horses plunging back into the earth, pulling the chariot and its 2 passengers after them. They saw the god of the dead, recognizable even to those who had never seen him before, bearing away their beloved companion. They saw the earth beginning to close again, sealing the opening through which the chariot had come, erasing the portal as though it had never existed. They ran toward her, these companions, these daughters of Oceanus. They ran as fast as they could, reaching out their hands as though they could somehow catch her, could somehow pull her back, could somehow undo what was happening. But they were not fast enough. The earth closed completely, just as they reached the spot where it had opened, and there was nothing left but unmarked grass and scattered flowers. The Narcissus gone, core gone. Only the echo of her scream lingering in the air for a moment before it too faded into silence. Core continued to scream as the chariot plunged downward, descending through passages that should not have existed, through darkness so complete she could not see anything, not even her own hands, not even the God who held her. The descent seemed to last forever and no time at all. She was disoriented, terrified, unable to understand what was happening or why. Her whole world had been safety and love and light, and now suddenly she was being pulled into darkness by a stranger, torn away from everything she knew, carried into depths she had not known existed. When the chariot finally stopped, when the horse's hooves struck solid ground again, instead of passing through earth and stone as though they were insubstantial, they were in the underworld. Core, who had only ever known the bright world above, now stood in a realm where no sun ever shone, where the only light came from torches that burned with cold flames, where the air was still and heavy and tasted of minerals and ancient stone and something else, something that might have been the essence of all the deaths that had ever occurred, all the endings that had ever been. Hades released her, and she stumbled away from him, looking around with wild eyes, trying to understand where she was, trying to find a way out, an escape, a path back to the world she knew. But there was none. She was in his palace now, in the throne room of the Underworld's king, and the only way out was the way they had come in, the passage through the earth that required his permission and his power to open. "Welcome," Hades said, and his voice was deep and measured and careful, as though he were trying to gentle a frightened animal, as though he understood that this was not going well, but did not know how else to proceed. "Welcome to my realm. Do not be afraid. You are safe here. You are to be my queen." Core stared at him, unable to process his words, unable to make sense of any of this. Queen. His queen. She was Core, daughter of Demeter, who picked flowers with her companions and knew nothing of ruling or kingdoms or any of this. She was not anyone's queen. She was not anyone's wife. She was just herself. And all she wanted was to go home, to return to her mother, to wake up from this nightmare that felt like it was still happening, that would not end no matter how desperately she wanted it to. "Let me go," she finally managed to say, her voice shaking, barely more than a whisper. "Please let me go. I want my mother. I want to go home." Something in Hades' expression shifted. Some flicker of emotion that might have been pity or regret or sorrow, but it was gone too quickly for her to identify. "I cannot," he said. "This has been decided. Zeus himself gave his permission. You belong here now, with me. In time, you will understand. In time, this will be your home. I will treat you well, I swear it. You will want for nothing. You will be queen of all this realm, second only to me in power and authority. Surely that is not such a terrible fate." But to Kor, who had never wanted power or authority, who had only wanted to gather flowers and laugh with her friends and be with her mother, it was the most terrible fate imaginable. She sank to the cold stone floor of the throne room and began to weep, great racking sobs that echoed through the empty halls of the Underworld, tears that fell onto the black stone and seemed to be absorbed by it, as though even her grief belonged to this place now, as though everything about her was being slowly claimed by the kingdom of the dead. Hades stood watching her, uncertain what to do, perhaps finally beginning to understand that he had made a terrible mistake, that power and authority could compel obedience, but could not create love or even acceptance. He had thought that taking a bride, having a queen beside him, would ease his loneliness. But as he watched this young goddess weep on the floor of his throne room, he realized that he might have simply exchanged one kind of loneliness for another, one that was worse because it included the knowledge that he had caused such pain, such fear, such misery. Above, in the sunlit world, Kor's scream had not gone entirely unheard. Hecate, the goddess of crossroads and magic and mysteries, had been passing nearby when that terrible cry split the air. She had looked toward its source, but had seen nothing by the time she arrived. Just the meadow full of flowers and a group of distraught nymphs who could barely explain what had happened. And Helios, the sun god who saw everything that occurred under his light, had witnessed the entire abduction from his chariot as he drove the sun across the sky. Though he had been too far away to intervene and would not have dared interfere with a plan approved by Zeus in any case. But Demeter had heard nothing. She had been far away when it happened, tending to a field of wheat in some distant land, encouraging the grain to grow tall and golden. She did not know yet that anything was wrong. She did not know that her daughter was gone, taken into the underworld, trapped in a realm of darkness and death, crying for her mother who could not hear. But she would know soon. Oh, she would know very soon. And when she found out, when she understood what had been done, her grief and rage would shake the world as thoroughly as the earth had shaken when it opened to let Hades through. The consequences of this abduction, of this violation, of this arrogant divine decision would ripple outward through time, transforming the cosmos in ways that even Zeus, for all his power and wisdom, had not foreseen. The girl called Kor, the maiden who had picked flowers in eternal springtime, was gone. In her place, weeping on the cold floor of the Underworld's throne room, was someone who would become Persephone, queen of the dead, goddess of transformation and rebirth, the figure who would forever stand between the world of the living and the world of the dead, belonging fully to neither, essential to both. But that transformation was still to come, for now there was only grief and fear and darkness and the beginning of a rage that would rewrite the natural order of the world. Demeter returned to her dwelling as evening approached. As the light softened and the day drew toward its peaceful close, she was in good spirits, satisfied with the day's work, looking forward to seeing her daughter, perhaps to hearing about the flowers Kor had gathered, the songs she had sung, the simple joys of her day. Demeter had brought gifts, fresh grain to be ground into flour, a particular type of apple that Kor favored, a new garland she had woven from wheat stalks and wildflowers during a moment of rest. The dwelling was empty. At first, this caused no concern. Kor might still be with her companions, might be on her way home even now. Demeter set down her gifts and busied herself with small tasks, preparing food for the evening meal, tidying the already tidy rooms, glancing occasionally toward the door, expecting at any moment to hear Kor's light footsteps, her cheerful voice calling out a greeting. But the evening deepened, and Kor did not come. Now Demeter felt the first stirrings of worry. She went to the door and looked out, searching the gathering dusk for any sign of her daughter. The gardens were empty. The paths were quiet. no figure approached through the dimming light. Where was she? This was unlike her. Kor always came home before dark, always checked in with her mother, was always reliable and responsible and considerate. Demeter went looking. She walked the familiar paths Kor and her companions usually took, calling her daughter's name, listening for an answer that did not come. The worry was growing into fear now, cold and sharp in her chest, driving her to move faster, to call louder, to search more desperately. Something was wrong. Something had happened. She knew it with the certainty that only a mother's intuition can provide. That bone-deep understanding that her child was in trouble, was in danger, needed her. She found the companions, or rather, they found her. The daughters of Oceanus, who had been with Kor in the meadow. They came to her in a distraught group, their faces pale, their voices trembling as they tried to explain what had happened. They spoke of the meadow, of the flowers, of the terrible moment when the earth opened and the dark chariot appeared and Kor was taken. They spoke of their helplessness, their inability to prevent what had occurred, their horror at witnessing something so violent and wrong in a world that had always been safe. Demeter listened to their story with a growing sense of disbelief and denial. This could not have happened. Her daughter could not have been taken. Not Corey, not her precious girl, not in a world where Zeus ruled and where his family was supposed to be protected. There had to be some mistake, some misunderstanding. Perhaps the girls had seen wrong, had misinterpreted what they witnessed. Perhaps Kor was simply lost, had wandered too far and could not find her way back. But even as these thoughts tried to form, Demeter knew they were false hopes, desperate attempts to avoid accepting an unbearable truth. The companions were certain of what they had seen. Kor was gone. Someone had taken her, pulled her into the earth, carried her away into darkness. Who? Demeter asked, though her voice had gone cold and strange, had become something that made even these immortal nymphs step back nervously. Who took her? Describe him to me. Tell me everything you saw. They described the chariot, the horses, the dark figure. They described his crown and his robes and the sense of darkness that had surrounded him. And as they described him, Demeter understood. There was only one god who fit that description. Only one deity who could open the earth and command horses that could pass through stone. Only one being who was associated with that kind of absolute darkness. Hades had taken her daughter. The realization hit Demeter like a physical blow. Her knees buckled, and she had to catch herself against a tree to keep from falling. Hades, the lord of the underworld, the god of the dead. Her daughter was in the realm of the dead, in the kingdom beneath the earth, in that place of darkness and sorrow and eternal separation from the living world. The companions were still talking, still trying to explain, but Demeter could no longer hear them. Her mind had gone to that terrible place where her daughter now was, trapped, frightened, alone. Kor, who loved flowers and sunlight and laughter, now in the deepest darkness imaginable, surrounded by the dead, held captive by a god who had no right to touch her, no permission to take her. Or did he? A new thought crystallized in Demeter's mind, more terrible than the first. Hades would not have dared to take Kor without permission. He was stern and serious and concerned with law and propriety, not given to rash action or criminal behavior. If he had taken Kor, if he had abducted her in broad daylight with such brazen confidence, it meant he believed he had the right to do so. And there was only one God whose permission would give him that right, whose approval would make such an abduction legitimate rather than criminal. Zeus. Zeus had allowed this. Zeus, her brother, her daughter's father, the king of the gods who was supposed to protect his family, had given Hades permission to take Kor, had perhaps even arranged it, facilitated it, helped plan the abduction. Zeus had betrayed her. Zeus had betrayed Kor. Zeus had traded his own daughter, Demeter's precious girl, to his brother without even consulting the girl's mother, without considering Kor's own wishes, without thinking about the consequences. The rage that filled Demeter in that moment was unlike anything she had ever felt before. It was cold and hot at the same time, a fury so intense it felt like it might tear her apart from the inside, but she did not let it consume her. Not yet. She channeled it, focused it, used it to drive her into action. She would find Kor. She would bring her daughter back. And if Zeus or Hades or any other god thought they could stop her, they would learn that a mother's love, when transformed into a mother's fury, was a force that even the king of the gods should fear. Demeter sent the companions away, dismissed them with a gesture that brooked no argument. This was her task now, her responsibility, her fight. She would not endanger these young nymphs further. They had witnessed enough horror for one day. Demeter began to search. For 9 days she searched, and those 9 days would become sacred in the memory of those who later honored her. 9 days of relentless, desperate searching, never resting, never sleeping, driven by a love so powerful it could not be stopped by exhaustion or despair. She carried blazing torches through day and night, holding light against the darkness that had swallowed her child. Twin flames that never went out because her determination never wavered. She searched everywhere. She combed through every corner of the earth, calling her daughter's name, looking in caves and grottos and deep places where someone might be hidden. She climbed mountains and dove into lakes, descended into valleys and crossed deserts, traveled from one end of the known world to the other and back again. She refused the food and drink of the gods, would not touch ambrosia or nectar, would not bathe, would not rest, would do nothing that might be interpreted as acceptance, as moving on, as anything other than the raw, desperate need to find her child. Demeter disguised herself as an old woman, hiding her divine nature, because she had realized that she could not go to Olympus, could not confront Zeus directly. Not yet. If she revealed herself, if she made her anger known before she had Kor safely back, Zeus might use his power to prevent her from continuing the search, might confine her somehow, or distract her with lies and promises that would never be kept. Better to search in secret, to use her power quietly, to work toward her goal without alerting those who might oppose her. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Though time had become strange and fluid for Demeter, unmeasured and unimportant compared to the overwhelming need to find her child. She wandered, asking everyone she met if they had seen a young girl, a beautiful maiden, someone who loved flowers. Most could not help her. They had seen nothing, knew nothing, could only offer sympathy that Demeter did not want and could not accept. But Hecate had heard Kor's scream, had been disturbed by it, had been thinking about it. When she encountered Demeter in her wanderings, she came forward and told the grieving mother what she knew. Not much, but something. A scream, a sense of violation. A moment when something wrong had happened. Hecate suggested they go together to Helios, the sun god, who saw everything from his vantage point in the sky. If anyone knew what had happened to Kor, it would be Helios. They found Helios as he was completing his daily journey across the sky, as he was preparing to descend into the west and rest before beginning again the next morning. He listened to Demeter's desperate questions, saw her ravaged face, her exhausted body, her barely controlled rage and grief. And because Helios was not a cruel god, because he understood that not knowing was sometimes worse than knowing even terrible truths, he told her what he had witnessed. He described the abduction in detail. He confirmed what Demeter had already suspected. Hades had taken Kor into the underworld, and yes, Zeus had given his permission, had arranged the whole thing, had betrayed his daughter and his sister without a moment's apparent regret. Helios tried to soften the blow, tried to suggest that perhaps this was not such a terrible thing, that Hades was a powerful god, that being queen of the underworld was an honor, that Demeter should accept what had happened and be proud that her daughter would rule beside such an important deity. These words, meant to comfort, had the opposite effect. They crystallized Demeter's fury into something cold and implacable and terrible. Accept it, be proud. Her daughter had been stolen, violated, imprisoned in darkness, and she was supposed to accept this as some kind of honor. Number. No, she would not accept it. She would never accept it. But what could she do? She could not enter the underworld herself. Only the dead could cross into Hades' realm freely, and even then they could never leave. She could not fight Hades directly. He was too powerful in his own domain, and any battle between them would be hopeless. She could not appeal to Zeus. He had proven himself untrustworthy, had shown that he cared nothing for her feelings or Kor's wishes. But Demeter had power of her own, power that even Zeus could not override completely, power that was essential to the functioning of the cosmos. She was the goddess of the harvest, the deity who made crops grow, who blessed the fields and ensured that mortals had food. Without her blessing, without her divine favor, the earth could not sustain life. And if she withdrew that blessing, if she went on strike against the cosmic order that had betrayed her, then even the king of the gods would have to pay attention. This was more than grief. This was cosmic protest. This was a mother using the only weapon she had against a patriarchal system that thought it could trade daughters like property, that thought power and authority could override love and consent. Demeter would hurt Zeus through humanity, would make him feel the consequences of his betrayal through the suffering of the mortals who worshipped him, who depended on him, who made offerings in his temples. Without those offerings, without those prayers and sacrifices, the gods themselves would weaken. It was not a punishment aimed at the guilty party, but sometimes the innocent must suffer to bring the powerful to justice. Demeter withdrew her blessing from the earth. Immediately, the change began. The crops in the fields, which had been growing green and strong, stopped growing. The wheat stalks that should have been swelling with grain remained stunted and thin. The fruit trees, which had been bearing continuously, suddenly ceased to produce. The flowers that had bloomed in profusion began to wither and die, their petals falling to the ground like tears. The earth, which had been generous and abundant, became barren and cold. A chill settled over the world, a coldness that had never existed before in this eternal springtime. Frost appeared on the ground in the mornings, killing the tender plants that had never had to endure such conditions. The leaves on the trees turned brown and fell, leaving naked branches reaching toward a sky that seemed grayer and more distant than before. Demeter had invented winter. She had not meant to create a whole new season, had not planned to fundamentally alter the climate of the earth. She had simply stopped caring for the growing things, had withdrawn her divine attention and protection, and nature had responded to her absence the way a garden responds when the gardener stops tending it. But the effect was more dramatic than anyone could have anticipated. Without Demeter's blessing, without her constant, gentle influence, the earth could not sustain life in the way it always had. The balance was broken, the cycle was interrupted, and the world began to die. Mortals noticed the change immediately and were terrified by it. Their crops failed. Their stored grain began to run low. Their animals grew thin and weak without proper grazing. Hunger spread across the land, and then famine. And with famine came disease and death, and a suffering that humans had never had to endure in such intensity before. They prayed to Zeus, begging him to restore the natural order, to make the earth fruitful again. They made offerings in his temples, sacrificed their precious animals, promised anything if only the gods would have mercy, would bring back the growing season, would save them from starvation. Zeus heard their prayers, and he was troubled. He had not anticipated this consequence when he gave Hades permission to marry Kor, He had not thought about how Demeter might react, had not considered that her grief and rage might be powerful enough to threaten the cosmic order itself. Mortals dying was problematic. It meant fewer worshippers, fewer offerings, fewer of those expressions of devotion that sustained the god's power and influence. More immediately, it meant that the other gods were blaming Zeus for the situation, were pressuring him to fix what he had broken. Zeus tried to reason with Demeter. He sent messengers to her, gods and goddesses, offering gifts, promising her honors, trying to persuade her to restore her blessing to the earth. But Demeter refused them all. She had withdrawn from Olympus, had taken refuge in a temple built for her by grateful mortals in the city of Eleusis. And there she sat, wrapped in dark robes, refusing all comfort, maintaining her stubborn, destructive protest against the injustice that had been done. Her message to Zeus was simple: "Return my daughter, and I will restore the earth. Keep her imprisoned in the underworld, and I will let the world die, and your precious mortals with it." Zeus finally understood that he would have to act, would have to undo what he had done. The situation had escalated beyond anything he could ignore or work around. Demeter would not be moved by gifts or promises or threats. The only thing that would satisfy her was Kor's return. And if that meant confronting Hades, demanding that his brother release his new queen, then so be it. Zeus sent Hermes, the messenger god, down to the underworld with a command for Hades: "Release Kor. Let her return to her mother. The cosmic order depends on it, and Zeus himself demands it." Hermes descended through the secret paths that connected the upper world to the lower, paths that he alone among the Olympians could navigate freely. He arrived in Hades' throne room and delivered Zeus's message, and Hades received it in silence, his expression unreadable, his dark eyes betraying nothing of what he was thinking or feeling. In the months since Kor had been taken to the underworld, though months might be the wrong word, since time moved strangely in that realm, where there were no days or nights, no seasons, no clear markers of duration, she had existed in a state of profound grief and stubborn resistance. She refused to eat. She refused to drink. She refused to accept any comfort that Hades tried to offer her. Hades had done his best to make her comfortable within the constraints of his dark kingdom. He had given her chambers that were as beautiful as anything in the underworld could be. decorated with gems that glowed with their own cold light, furnished with soft places to rest, adorned with tapestries that depicted scenes from the world above, meadows and flowers and sunlight, things he thought might comfort her, reminders of home that turned out to be more torment than solace. He had tried to speak with her, to explain his reasoning, to help her understand that he had not acted out of malice, but out of loneliness and desire for a companion. He told her about his isolation, about the burden of ruling the underworld, about how he had thought she might bring light and life into his dark realm. He apologized for frightening her, for taking her without her consent, for handling the situation so poorly. But Kor would not listen. She would not forgive. She spent her days sitting silently in her chambers, staring at the walls, refusing to engage with Hades or with the realm she found herself trapped in. Sometimes she wept quietly. Sometimes she simply sat in numb silence. But she never stopped grieving, never stopped longing for her mother, and the world above never accepted that this was now her life. The dead, those pale shadows who populated the underworld, were drawn to her. They could sense something different about her, something that carried the essence of the living world, and they would gather outside her chambers, hovering there like moths around a flame, seeking some small sense of the life they had lost. Kor found their presence disturbing at first. These remnants of people, these shades who had once been fully human but were now diminished, reduced, incomplete. But gradually, she began to feel a kind of pity for them. They were prisoners too, in their way. They had not chosen to die, had not asked to end up in this dark realm, were simply victims of the same cosmic laws that had trapped her here. She began to speak to them quietly, asking them about their lives, listening to their faded memories of sunlight and family and the world above. It gave her something to do, a way to pass the unmeasured time, and it eased their existence slightly, having someone acknowledge them, treat them as beings worthy of attention, rather than simply as subjects to be managed and forgotten. Hades noticed this, but said nothing. He was struggling with his own complex emotions. Guilt over what he had done. Frustration that his attempt to ease his loneliness had only created a different kind of loneliness, one that included the constant presence of someone who hated him, who refused to see him as anything but her captor. A growing, reluctant respect for Kor's strength, her refusal to be broken by her circumstances, her ability to find compassion even for the dead when she had no compassion left for him. He had come to care for her, which made everything worse. He had wanted a queen, a companion, but he had not expected to actually develop feelings for this girl who had been forced into his realm. He found himself noticing small things about her. The way she tilted her head when listening to the dead, the rare moments when something would spark a brief smile before she remembered where she was, and the smile would die, the strength it must take for her to maintain her resistance. Day after day after day, he wanted her to be happy, or at least less miserable. But he did not know how to accomplish that without releasing her. And releasing her had not been an option. Not until Zeus's command arrived. Now, standing in his throne room with Hermes waiting for his response, Hades faced a choice. He could obey Zeus and let Kor return to the upper world, which would end this situation, restore the cosmic order, appease Demeter's rage, but would also confirm his worst fears, that he was meant to be alone, that his attempt to find companionship was doomed, that the underworld would remain forever the empty, joyless place it had been before Kor's arrival. Or he could refuse, could defy Zeus, could insist on his right to keep the bride he had been given permission to take. But that would likely lead to conflict with Zeus, would certainly ensure that Kor never willingly accepted him, would guarantee that any hope of her eventually growing to care for him would be crushed completely. Hades was not a fool. He understood that the situation was unsalvageable in its current form. Kor hated him. She would always hate him if he kept her here against her will, if he defied Zeus to hold on to her. The only chance, however slim, of there ever being anything real between them was if he let her go, if he showed her that he could be reasonable, that he was capable of recognizing his mistakes and trying to correct them. But there was a law, an ancient law that governed the underworld, one that even Zeus could not easily override. Anyone who ate food in the underworld was bound to remain there, at least partially, forever. It was one of the fundamental rules of the realm, part of what gave Hades power over the dead, part of what prevented souls from escaping back to the living world. Kor had not eaten anything since arriving in the underworld. She had refused all food and drink sustained by her divine nature, which did not require sustenance in the same way mortal bodies did. As long as she had not eaten, she could potentially leave without being bound by the underworld's laws. But if she ate even the smallest thing, Hades looked at Hermes and said, "I will comply with Zeus's command. Core may return to her mother, but first let me speak with her one final time. Surely I am owed that much, a chance to bid farewell to the bride I am losing." Hermes nodded. This seemed reasonable, even generous given the circumstances. He would wait. Hades went to Core's chambers. She was sitting by the cold fire that provided light but no warmth, speaking quietly with a group of shades who had gathered to hear her voice. When she saw Hades enter, she fell silent, her expression becoming guarded and wary. "You may go," Hades said to the dead, and they dispersed immediately, obedient to their Lord's command, even as they cast reluctant glances back at Core. Hades stood before her, and for a long moment he said nothing, just looked at her, perhaps memorizing her face, perhaps trying to find words for what he wanted to say. Finally, he spoke. "Zeus has commanded that you be released. Hermes is here to escort you back to the upper world, back to your mother. You are free to go, Core. I am sorry for all of it, for taking you, for frightening you, for keeping you here. I acted wrongly, and I acknowledge that now. I hope that someday you might understand that I never meant to cause you such pain." Core stared at him, barely able to process what he was saying. Free. She was free. She could leave, could return to her mother, could see sunlight again. It seemed impossible, too good to be true, some kind of trick or trap. "Truly?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, afraid that speaking too loudly might break this spell, might cause him to take back his words. "Truly," Hades confirmed. "But before you go, will you walk with me? Just for a moment. Let me show you the gardens. I know they cannot compare to the meadows of the upper world, but I cultivated them hoping to give you some small comfort. Will you look at them just once before you leave?" Core hesitated. She wanted nothing more than to leave immediately, to flee this place as fast as possible, to never look back. But something in Hades' expression, some genuine sadness or regret, made her pause. He was letting her go. The least she could do was grant him this small request, these few more moments before she left his realm forever. "All right," she said quietly. "Show me your gardens." They walked together through the palace and out into an area Core had not seen before. And despite herself, despite her determination to hate everything about this place, she had to admit that the gardens were impressive. Hades had created a space where plants from the upper world grew alongside strange underworld flora, had cultivated an impossible blend of life and death, light and shadow. There were flowers here, real flowers, blooming in defiance of the surrounding darkness. There were trees bearing fruit that glowed with a faint luminescence. And in the center of the garden grew a pomegranate tree. The pomegranates hanging from its branches were magnificent, deep red, almost black, their skin gleaming in the cold light. They looked ripe and perfect, more beautiful than any pomegranates Kor had ever seen in the world above. The pomegranate is sacred to the underworld, Hades said quietly. But it also symbolizes life and fertility, blood and birth. It exists in both worlds, like a bridge between the living and the dead. He reached up and picked one of the fruits, holding it in his palm, studying it. Then he looked at Kor, and there was something in his eyes, something she could not quite read, something that might have been hope or resignation or some mixture of both. "I know you have not eaten since you came here," he said, "and I respect the strength that required. But you have a long journey ahead of you, a long ascent back to the upper world. Will you take this? Just a taste, something to sustain you on your journey home. I promise you, Kor, I swear to you, this is not a trick. I am truly releasing you. But let me give you this one thing, this small gift, before you go." Kor looked at the pomegranate. She was not particularly hungry. Her divine nature sustained her without food. But something about the fruit called to her. Perhaps it was simply that she had been so long without eating anything, without tasting the pleasures of food. Perhaps it was that this was her last moment in the underworld, and taking something from it felt like a small act of defiance, a way of claiming some tiny victory, of leaving on her own terms, rather than simply fleeing in terror. Or perhaps it was that Hades looked so sad, so resigned, so utterly defeated, and some small part of her, despite everything, felt a flicker of sympathy for this lonely god who had tried so clumsily to ease his isolation. She reached out and took the pomegranate from his hand. Their fingers brushed for a moment, and she felt something pass between them, some exchange of energy or understanding that she could not define. Then she stepped back and looked at the fruit. It was heavy in her hand, full of juice and seeds. She had always loved pomegranates in the world above, had enjoyed the sweet tart burst of flavor when she bit into the seeds, the way the juice stained her lips and fingers. This fruit looked even more appealing than any she remembered. She broke it open. The seeds gleamed like rubies, like drops of blood crystallized into edible jewels. She picked up a few seeds, perhaps 6, perhaps 7. She was not carefully counting, and placed them in her mouth. They burst against her tongue with a flavor that was indescribable, both sweet and bitter, both familiar and utterly strange. The taste of life and death mixed together, the essence of both worlds in concentrated form. She swallowed the seeds and immediately felt different. Not worse, not poisoned or trapped, but changed somehow, as though something fundamental had shifted in her nature. She had eaten food of the underworld. She had taken the pomegranate seeds into her body, had made them part of herself, and in doing so, she had created a connection to this realm that could never be entirely severed. Hades watched her eat the seeds, and his expression remained neutral, carefully controlled. But something flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been satisfaction, or might have been sorrow. She could not tell. "Come," he said. "Hermes is waiting. It is time for you to go home." They returned to the throne room, where Hermes stood looking impatient, tapping his winged staff against the stone floor. Cerberus was there too, the three-headed guardian who whined softly when he saw Kor, as though even this monstrous dog had grown fond of her presence and was sad to see her leave. "She is ready," Hades told Hermes. "Take her to her mother. Tell Demeter that I release Kor freely, that I acknowledge I acted wrongly in taking her, and that I hope she will restore her blessing to the earth now that her daughter is returned." Hermes nodded and beckoned to Kor. "Come, lady. Your chariot awaits. We will travel swiftly, and soon you will see sunlight again. We'll be reunited with your mother. We'll be free of this dark place." Kor followed Hermes toward the entrance of the underworld, toward the passage that would lead back to the surface world. She did not look back at Hades. She could not bear to, could not risk having her resolve weaken, could not let herself feel anything for the god who had imprisoned her, even if he had ultimately released her. The journey upward seemed to last both forever and no time at all. They traveled through darkness and then through increasing gradations of grey, and then finally, there was light ahead. Real light, sunlight, the glorious golden illumination of the world above. Kor ran toward it, desperate for it, after so long in darkness, and burst out of the passage into a world she thought she might never see again. The sunlight was almost painful in its intensity after the constant dimness of the underworld. Kor had to shield her eyes, had to let them adjust gradually to the brightness. But even through the pain of that adjustment, she felt joy, pure and overwhelming. She was free, she was out, she was home. And there, running towards her across a field that had recently been barren, but was now suddenly, miraculously beginning to green again, was Demeter. Mother and daughter collided in an embrace so fierce it could have broken mortal bones. They held each other and wept, though whether the tears were joy or sorrow or relief or some mixture of all three, neither could have said. They had been separated for months, had each endured their own forms of suffering, had each believed at times that they might never see each other again, and now here they were, reunited, together again, safe. Demeter pulled back just far enough to look at her daughter, to search her face, to assure herself that Kor was truly all right, truly unharmed, truly here. "Are you well?" Demeter asked urgently. "Did he hurt you? Did he? Are you all right?" "I am all right," Kor said, though her voice shook. "He did not harm me. Not physically. He kept me in the underworld, but he did not hurt me. I am all right, Mother. I am home." Demeter pulled her close again, and for a long time, they simply stood there, holding each other, as around them the earth responded to Demeter's joy and relief. Grass began pushing up through the soil. Flowers budded and opened. Trees that had been bare began to show the first hints of new leaves. The world was awakening from its winter, responding to the goddess's restored blessing, eager to be fruitful and abundant once more. But their reunion was interrupted by Hermes, who had been standing nearby, waiting awkwardly for the emotional reunion to subside. "Demeter," he said quietly, "there is something you need to know." Kor ate while in the underworld. Demeter froze. She slowly released Kor and stepped back, staring at her daughter with dawning horror. "You ate? You ate food of the underworld?" Kor nodded, confused by her mother's reaction. "Only a few pomegranate seeds. Hades gave me a pomegranate before I left, and I ate a few seeds. Why? What does that mean?" Demeter's face had gone pale. She turned to Hermes. "How many?" How many seeds did she eat? Hermes looked uncomfortable. I do not know. I did not witness it. But Hades said it was only a few. He suggested perhaps 6 seeds. 6 seeds. The number resonated with terrible significance. There was a law, ancient and unbreakable, that anyone who consumed food of the underworld was bound to remain there. But the specifics of that binding could be negotiated, could be proportional to the amount consumed. 6 seeds out of the many hundreds in a pomegranate. That was a small portion, but it was still something, still enough to create an obligation, a tie that could not be completely severed. Demeter understood immediately what had happened. Hades had let Core go, yes, but he had ensured she could not stay away entirely. The pomegranate had been his final gambit, his way of maintaining some connection to the girl he had wanted as his queen. Clever, cruel, entirely in keeping with his nature as Lord of the Dead, who understood contracts and obligations and binding laws better than any other god. It means, Demeter said slowly, her voice heavy with grief and rage and resignation, that you cannot stay here all the time. The law of the underworld binds you partially now. You ate 6 seeds from the fruit of the dead, and that creates a debt, an obligation. You must return to the underworld for a portion of each year, must spend time there as Hades' queen, must fulfill the role he intended for you, even though you are free to leave and return here for the rest of the year. Core felt the world tilting beneath her feet. Return to the underworld? After everything, after finally escaping, she would have to go back. No, she whispered. No, that cannot be. I was freed. I came home. I cannot go back there. But even as she protested, she could feel the truth of it, could sense the binding that the pomegranate seeds had created. She had thought eating them was harmless, had thought it was just a farewell gesture, a small moment of normalcy before returning to her real life. But it had been a trap after all, or if not a trap exactly, then a hook, something that would pull her back to the underworld year after year, preventing her from ever being entirely free of that dark realm and its lonely lord. Demeter turned her rage toward the sky, toward Olympus, toward Zeus, who had created this situation. She shouted her fury into the heavens, demanded that Zeus fix this, undo it, break the binding that held her daughter. But even as she raged, she knew it was futile. the law was the law. Zeus might be king of the gods, but even he could not entirely override the fundamental rules that govern the cosmos. Kor had eaten the seeds. The binding existed. It could not be simply wished away. Zeus did come, descending from Olympus in all his glory and power, and he listened to Demeter's fury and Kor's despair, and he understood that he needed to find a compromise, something that would satisfy both Demeter and Hades, something that would restore cosmic order even if it could not undo what had been done. Kor will be shared, Zeus decreed. For the portion of the year corresponding to the number of seeds she ate, she will return to the underworld and reign there as Hades' queen. For the remainder of the year, she will live here in the upper world with her mother, free and unbound. This is the compromise. This is the law. This is how it will be. The weight of Zeus's decree settled over them, as binding as any pomegranate seed. Kor would be split between two worlds, would belong fully to neither, would be forever divided, forever traveling between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead. Demeter wept, but eventually accepted this compromise because it was better than losing Kor entirely, better than having her daughter trapped in the underworld forever. At least she would have her for part of each year, would be able to hold her and see her and know she was safe, at least for a time. And so the pattern was established, the cycle that would continue forever after. For 2/3 of the year, some sources say 8 months, others say 9, Kori would live in the upper world with her mother. During that time, Demeter's joy would make the earth fruitful. Spring would come, bringing life and renewal. Summer would follow, warm and abundant. The harvest would be gathered in early autumn, the final expression of Demeter's blessing before the separation began again. But when the time came for Kor to descend once more into the underworld, when she had to leave her mother and return to reign as queen of the dead, Demeter's grief would poison her blessing. The earth would become cold and barren. Plants would wither and die. Winter would grip the world, a season of death and dormancy that reflected the goddess's sorrow at losing her daughter once again. And in the underworld, Kor would reign as Persephone, a name that meant bringer of destruction, or perhaps she who brings death, acknowledging her transformation from innocent maiden to queen of the dead. She would sit on a throne beside Hades, would hear the petitions of the dead, would learn the laws and customs of that dark realm, would become something new, something more than the girl she had been, but also something less, something divided, something torn. The Greeks would celebrate this myth in their Eleusinian mysteries, secret religious rites that promised initiates a vision of eternal life, a promise that just as Persephone returned from death to life each year, so too might mortals hope for some kind of existence after death, some continuation, some reunion with those they loved. The mysteries gave hope in the face of mortality, comfort in the face of grief, the promise that endings were not final, that separations could be temporary, that love could transcend even death itself. But at its heart, the myth was about loss and compromise and transformation. It was about a mother's love and a daughter's innocence destroyed. It was about the price of divine arrogance and the cost of cosmic order. It was about how even the gods must sometimes accept painful compromises, must live with consequences they never intended, must adapt to a world that changed in ways they could not control. The first time Persephone had to return to the Underworld, after those precious months spent with her mother in the world above, was the hardest. She did not want to go. She clung to Demeter and begged to be allowed to stay, though she knew it was futile, knew that the law bound her, that the pomegranate seeds had created an obligation she could not refuse. Demeter wept, but ultimately let her go, because what choice did either of them have? The cosmic order demanded it. Zeus had decreed it. The binding was real and irrevocable. Hermes escorted her down again, through the secret passages, into the darkness that she had hoped never to see again. When she arrived in the Underworld's throne room, Hades was waiting for her. He stood before his throne, formal and rigid, perhaps uncertain how she would react to seeing him again, perhaps afraid of her anger or her pain. But Persephone surprised them both by not running away, not collapsing in tears, not retreating to her chambers to mourn in isolation. Instead, she walked forward and looked at him directly, meeting his dark eyes with her own gaze that had changed, that was no longer the innocent look of core, but something harder, something that had been tempered by suffering and loss. "If I must be here," she said quietly, "if I must spend part of each year in this realm, if I must be queen of the dead, then I will truly be queen. I will not hide away in my chambers. I will not weep uselessly. I will learn what it means to rule here. I will become what this place requires me to be, but I will do it on my terms, not yours. Hades looked at her for a long moment, and then, slowly, he nodded. I will teach you, he said. I will show you how to rule the underworld, and perhaps we can find a way to make this bearable for both of us. And so Persephone's education began. Hades taught her the laws that govern the underworld, the complex system of rules and obligations that determined where souls went when they died, how they were judged, what their existence in the realm of the dead would be like. He showed her Tartarus, where the worst sinners suffered eternal punishment. Sisyphus endlessly rolling his boulder up a hill, only to watch it roll back down. Tantalus reaching for food and drink that always remained just out of reach. The Danaids filling leaky jars that could never be filled. He showed her Elysium, where the blessed souls dwelt in a kind of paradise, honored heroes, and those who had lived particularly virtuous lives, enjoying pleasures that approximated what they had loved in life. He introduced her to Cerberus, who despite his fearsome appearance turned out to be, if not exactly friendly, at least not actively hostile, once he understood that Persephone was now his mistress as well as Hades' queen. She learned to speak to the dead, to hear their petitions, to make judgments about disputes that arose even in the shadowy afterlife. She learned the geography of the underworld, the different rivers, Styx, Acheron, Cocytus, Lethe, Phlegethon, each with its own properties and purpose. And as she learned, she changed. The innocent core who had picked flowers in meadows was dying, being replaced by something darker and more powerful. Persephone, for that was truly her name now, a name that meant bringer of destruction, or she who brings death, was becoming a queen in truth, not just in title. She learned to project authority that made even the most defiant shades bow their heads. She learned to make decisions that affected the fates of souls, to dispense justice with a combination of mercy and sternness that surprised even Hades. She was becoming dread Persephone, feared and respected, a goddess who stood equal to her husband in power, if not in experience, who would one day be invoked by mortals, seeking to curse their enemies or petition for justice beyond the grave. This transformation was her own, not imposed by Hades or anyone else. She chose how to inhabit her role, chose to be powerful rather than passive, chose to become a true ruler of the dead, rather than simply their prisoner. If she could not escape this fate, she would at least define it on her own terms. And gradually, very gradually, she found herself adapting to this strange dual existence. She was Persephone in the Underworld, queen of the dead, stern and fair, dispensing justice and maintaining order in the realm of shadows. But when she returned to the upper world, when she climbed back through the passages to emerge into sunlight and her mother's embrace, she became core again, or tried to, attempted to reclaim some of that lost innocence, that simple joy in flowers and meadows and the company of friends. But she could never fully be core again. She had been changed too profoundly by her experiences. She had seen death up close, had ruled over the dead, had learned things about the cosmos that could not be unlearned. She existed now in a liminal space between maiden and woman, between life and death, between innocence and knowledge. She was both core and Persephone, and she would remain both for all eternity, switching between identities as she switched between worlds. Her relationship with Hades evolved as well. It never became what he had perhaps hoped for when he first abducted her. Never turned into a conventional marriage of love and affection. But over time, over years, over centuries, it developed into something more complex. A partnership of sorts, a mutual respect, an understanding that they were bound together by fate and law and the pomegranate seeds, and that they might as well make the best of it. Hades never stopped regretting how he had handled their beginning. He would have taken it back if he could, would have done things differently, would have courted her properly if he had been given the chance. But the past could not be changed, even by gods. And so he did his best to be a good co-ruler, to respect her autonomy, to give her real power and authority in the underworld, rather than just treating her as a figurehead or a decoration. And Persephone, for her part, eventually came to see Hades more clearly, to understand the loneliness and isolation that had driven him to such desperate action. She could not entirely forgive what he had done, but she could understand it, could see him as a complex being rather than simply as her captor. She even came to appreciate certain aspects of the underworld, the way everything was ordered and logical, the way justice was dispensed fairly, even if harshly, the way death, while sad, was also peaceful, a rest after the struggles of life. The world above adjusted to the new order of things. The seasons became fixed, predictable, part of the natural cycle. Spring came when Persephone returned to her mother, the earth celebrating her resurrection from the underworld with new growth and blossoming flowers. Summer followed as mother and daughter enjoyed their time together, as Demeter's joy made the crops grow tall and strong. Autumn arrived as the separation drew near. The harvest gathered in before Persephone had to leave again, the leaves falling from the trees like tears, and winter descended when Persephone returned to the underworld, when Demeter's grief made the earth cold and barren. A time of death and dormancy and waiting for the spring that would eventually, inevitably, come. Mortals learn to live with the seasons, to plant in spring and harvest in autumn, to prepare for winter's hardships and celebrate spring's return. They told stories about Persephone, made offerings to her in both her aspects as maiden goddess of spring and as queen of the underworld. They understood, perhaps better than the gods themselves, that her story was not really about her abduction or her marriage, but about transformation and loss, about how pain can create new patterns, how suffering can be integrated into the structure of existence, how even the worst violations can eventually become bearable, can even be transformed into something meaningful. And if you listen carefully, on the edge between seasons, in those liminal moments when winter is giving way to spring or summer is fading into autumn, you might catch an echo of that ancient story. The earth sighs as Persephone makes her journey, ascending or descending, leaving one parent for the other, switching between her two roles, her two identities, her two worlds. The flowers that bloom in spring are her tears of joy at reunion. The leaves that fall in autumn are her tears of sorrow at separation. The cold of winter is her mother's grief. The warmth of summer is her mother's happiness. She is the queen of two worlds, the goddess who exists between, the bridge that connects life and death, growth and decay, joy and sorrow. She is the reminder that all things are cyclical, that loss and renewal are forever intertwined, that even the gods must sometimes bow to forces beyond their control, must accept painful compromises, must live with the consequences of actions that seemed reasonable at the time but turned out to reshape the cosmos in unexpected ways. Let yourself drift now into the rhythms of this ancient story, into the pattern it established, the cycle it created. Feel the pull of the seasons, the eternal dance of life and death, growth and dormancy, joy and sorrow. This is the gift that Demeter and Persephone gave to the world, though it was a gift born of pain, a pattern created by suffering and loss and difficult compromise. Spring comes every year without fail. No matter how long or harsh the winter, spring eventually arrives, bringing warmth and life back to the cold earth. Seeds that have been dormant underground begin to sprout. Trees that have been bare put forth new leaves. Flowers push up through the soil, opening their petals to the sun, painting the landscape with color after winter's monochrome. Birds return from wherever they spent the cold months, filling the air with song. The world comes alive again, reborn, renewed. This is Persephone ascending from the underworld, returning to her mother, bringing spring with her. This is Demeter's joy made manifest in the physical world, her happiness at being reunited with her daughter, expressed through the greening of the earth. This is hope realized, absence ended, separation transformed back into togetherness. The Greeks celebrated Persephone's return with festivals, with offerings of flowers and grain, with rituals that acknowledged the goddess's journey and thanked her for bringing life back to the world. They understood that spring was not automatic, was not guaranteed, was a gift that had to be recognized and honored. They knew that behind the natural processes of warming weather and growing plants stood these divine figures, these goddesses, whose emotional states shaped the physical world, whose joy and sorrow moved through the earth like currents flowing through water. Summer follows spring, those long bright days when everything grows and ripens, when the fields fill with grain and the trees heavy with fruit, when the earth is at its most generous and abundant. These are the months when Persephone and Demeter are together, when mother and daughter enjoy their time as a unit, as a family, as two beings who love each other and are finally, temporarily, allowed to simply exist in that love without separation or threat of separation. But summer cannot last forever. Nothing can last forever, not even the happiness of gods. The earth turns time passes in its relentless way, and eventually, the moment comes when Persephone must descend again, must return to the underworld, must resume her role as Queen of the Dead. The transition is gradual, giving both goddesses time to prepare, time to say their farewells, time to strengthen themselves for the separation they know is coming. Autumn arrives with its own beauty, bittersweet and melancholy. The leaves change color, transforming green into gold and red and orange, a final blaze of glory before they fall. The harvest is gathered, the fruits of summer's abundance stored away against winter's scarcity. There is a feeling of completion in autumn, of cycles coming round again, of preparation for the next phase. But there is also anticipation of loss, knowledge that the bright days are ending, awareness that separation is imminent. And then Persephone descends, returning to the underworld, walking down through those dark passages to take up her throne beside Hades once more. She goes willingly now, no longer dragged or forced, but accepting her obligation, understanding her dual role. But acceptance does not mean the separation is easy. It still hurts. It still feels like a small death every time, a little ending, a temporary loss of the light and warmth and simple pleasures of the upper world. Winter falls like a blanket of sorrow, covering the earth in cold and darkness. Demeter mourns her daughter's absence, and her mourning manifests as frost and snow and bitter wind. Plants die back to their roots. Trees stand bare and vulnerable. Animals hibernate or migrate or simply endure, waiting for the cold to pass. The world goes quiet, subdued, patient in its suffering, knowing that this too shall pass, that spring will eventually come again, even if right now it feels impossible, feels like winter might last forever. The Greeks gathered together during winter, telling stories around fires, keeping each other warm, waiting for spring. They remembered that Persephone was not gone forever, just temporarily absent, just fulfilling her obligations in the underworld, just being the queen she needed to be. They held on to hope, even in the darkest, coldest days, because the story promised them that separation was temporary, that reunion would come, that spring would return as surely as it had every year before. And it did. Spring came. Persephone ascended. Demeter rejoiced. The cycle began again, eternal and unchanging, reliable in a way that few things in the cosmos were reliable. The seasons turned, Year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium, the pattern established by divine sorrow and divine joy, by a mother's love and a daughter's transformation, by an abduction that became a marriage, that became a cosmic principle that shaped the physical world. This is what the myth teaches if we listen carefully enough. It teaches that pain can become pattern, that suffering can be integrated into the structure of existence in ways that make that existence richer and more meaningful. It teaches that loss and reunion are forever intertwined, two sides of the same coin, neither possible without the other. It teaches that even the worst violations can eventually, over time, with work and acceptance and adaptation, become bearable, can even be transformed into something that has value and beauty. It teaches that mothers and daughters have a bond that cannot be entirely broken, even by death, even by the decrees of kings, even by the laws that govern the cosmos. Demeter never stopped loving Koi, never stopped grieving during their separations, never stopped celebrating their reunions. That love shaped the world, literally changed the physical reality of existence, proved that some emotional bonds are so strong they can alter the very fabric of nature. And it teaches that transformation is inevitable, that innocence cannot be preserved forever, that everyone must eventually leave childhood behind and take up whatever complicated adult roles await them. Kor became Persephone. The maiden became the queen. The girl who picked flowers became the goddess who ruled the dead. This was painful, was forced upon her without her consent, was in many ways unjust and wrong. But she found a way to survive it, to adapt to it, to become something new that incorporated both her original self and the role that had been thrust upon her. It also teaches us about power and how those who seem powerless can find sources of strength in unexpected places. Demeter, denied justice through normal channels, found power in withdrawal, in refusal, in striking against the cosmic order itself. Persephone, stolen from her home and forced into an unwanted role, found power in choosing how she would inhabit that role, in becoming truly formidable rather than accepting victimhood. The story resonates across millennia, not because it offers easy answers or comfortable morals, but because it acknowledges the complexity of existence, the way trauma and transformation are intertwined, the way we must all sometimes live in two worlds at once, comfortable in neither, but essential to both. This is perhaps why the myth has seen such a resurgence in modern times, why it continues to be retold and reimagined and reinterpreted. Each generation finds something new in it, some aspect that speaks to their particular concerns. Some see it as a story of survival and adaptation. Others see it as a dark romance, finding beauty in the bond that forms between Hades and Persephone, despite its difficult beginning. Still others focus on Demeter, on maternal love and grief, and the power of refusing to accept injustice. The myth is large enough to hold all these interpretations and more, rich enough to offer new insights no matter how many times it is told. She became the goddess of two worlds, comfortable in neither, essential to both. She became the liminal figure, existing in the between spaces, the threshold goddess who could move between life and death, growth and decay, joy and sorrow. She became the bridge, the connection, the proof that these apparently opposite states were actually two aspects of a unified whole, that death and life were not enemies, but partners in an eternal dance. The ancient Greeks understood this in ways that we perhaps have forgotten. They did not try to pretend that death was not real, did not avoid thinking about mortality, did not push the underworld and its ruler to the margins of consciousness. They acknowledged Hades and Persephone as essential deities, honored them, told their story, participated in the Eleusinian mysteries that promise some kind of continuation after death. Some hope that the grave was not the absolute end, but simply a transition, a passage from one state to another, a movement from the upper world to the lower, and perhaps someday back again. They looked at the seasons and saw not just weather patterns, but divine emotions made manifest. They saw Demeter's love in the spring blossoms, her grief in the winter snows. They saw Persephone in every seed that fell into the earth and sprouted, dying and being reborn, descending into darkness and emerging into light. They saw the whole world as a reflection of this central myth, this story of separation and reunion, loss and recovery, death and renewal. And perhaps we can see it too, if we look carefully, if we let ourselves be open to the mythic dimensions of existence. When spring comes, and the world greens after winter's bareness. That is Persephone returning, bringing life with her. When autumn arrives and the leaves fall and the cold begins to creep in, that is Persephone descending and the world mourning her departure. The seasons are not just physical phenomena, but emotional realities, expressions of divine feelings that shape the physical world, reminders that love and loss are woven into the very structure of existence. Let this story carry you now towards sleep, toward your own descent into darkness, your own nightly journey into the underworld of dreams. Like Persephone, you descend knowing you will return, trusting that the darkness is temporary, that morning will come and bring you back to the light. Like Demeter, those who love you trust that your absence is not permanent, that you will wake again, will return from wherever dreams take you. Sleep is a little death. The Greeks understood this. Every night we practice dying, letting go of consciousness, surrendering to darkness, trusting that we will wake again. And every morning we practice rebirth, opening our eyes, returning to awareness, emerging from that dark place renewed and ready to face another day. We are all Persephone, descending and ascending, dying and being reborn, existing in both worlds, comfortable in neither, essential to both. The pomegranate seeds bind us to the darkness even as we live in light. We carry mortality within us always, the knowledge that we will eventually make that final descent, the one from which there is no return, at least not in the way Persephone returns every spring. But the myth suggests, in its way, that even that final descent might not be absolute, that the underworld is not an ending, but a transition, that something continues even after death, that love transcends even the final separation. This is the promise of the Eleusinian mysteries, the hope they offered to initiates, that having witnessed the return of Persephone, having participated in rituals that reenacted her journey, they too might hope for some kind of continuation, some existence after death that was not just the shadowy half-life of Hades, but something richer, something that carried forward the loves and connections and identities they had formed in life. We cannot know if that promise is true. The mysteries remain mysterious, their secrets lost when the last initiate died centuries ago. But the story endures, the pattern persists, the seasons still turn in their eternal cycle. Spring still comes after winter, Life still emerges from apparent death. Seeds planted in darkness still sprout and reach toward light. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is the real message. Not that we personally will live forever, but that life itself continues, that the pattern persists, that love and joy return even after periods of sorrow and loss, that the cycle goes on. Demeter still mourns every winter and rejoices every spring. Persephone still descends and ascends, traveling between worlds, fulfilling her dual role. Hades still rules his dark kingdom, perhaps less lonely now, perhaps having learned something about patience and respect and the difference between possession and genuine connection. Zeus still governs Olympus, perhaps a bit wiser for having seen the consequences of his arrogant decisions, though probably not wise enough to avoid making similar mistakes in the future. And the earth still turns. The seasons still change. The flowers still bloom in spring and fade in autumn. The leaves still fall and return, the whole world continuing its eternal dance of death and renewal, loss and recovery, separation and reunion. This is the legacy of Hades and Persephone. The gift they gave us, though neither of them intended it. The pattern they established through their pain and struggle and eventual acceptance. Close your eyes now and feel yourself descending, like Persephone going down to her winter throne, like every sleeper sinking into dreams, like every seed falling into dark earth, waiting to sprout. The descent is not to be feared. It is necessary, natural, part of the cycle that makes growth and renewal possible. Without winter, there can be no spring. Without death, there can be no appreciation of life. Without separation, there can be no joy in reunion. Without darkness, there can be no understanding of light. You are safe in this descent, as Persephone learned to be safe in hers. The darkness is temporary. The cold will pass. Spring is waiting on the other side of winter. Dawn is waiting on the other side of night. And waking is waiting on the other side of sleep. You will return, will ascend again, will open your eyes to light and warmth and the world you love. But for now, rest in the darkness. Be comfortable in the underworld of sleep. Let Persephone's story remind you that even queens of the dead return to life, that even the longest winter eventually gives way to spring. Dream of pomegranate seeds, ruby red and gleaming, the taste of both worlds, the binding that is also a bridge. Dream of flowers blooming in meadows of light and darkness both, growing in impossible places, proof that life persists even where it seems it cannot. Dream of a mother's love that shapes the world, that refuses to accept loss as final, that mourns every separation and celebrates every reunion with world-changing intensity. Dream of a daughter's transformation, of innocence lost and wisdom gained, of the girl who became a queen, of the maiden who learned to rule the dead while still cherishing the living. Dream of Hades and Persephone, the king and queen of the Underworld, sitting on their dark thrones, dispensing justice to the shades who come before them, maintaining order in that realm of shadows and memory. Dream of them existing in their complicated relationship, not quite love, but something more than mere duty, a partnership forged in difficult circumstances, an understanding built slowly over ages, a respect earned through shared experience and mutual compromise. Dream of the seasons turning, of the wheel of the year spinning on, of spring and summer and autumn and winter following each other in their appointed order, predictable and constant, the one pattern in the cosmos that never fails, the one promise that is always kept. No matter how long the winter, spring comes, no matter how dark the night, dawn breaks, no matter how deep you descend into sleep, you will wake again. This is the eternal cycle, the pattern established by divine grief and divine joy, the gift that Demeter and Persephone gave to the world even though it cost them so much. Let it carry you now into peaceful rest, into restorative sleep, into dreams that will refresh and renew you, so that when you wake, you will emerge like Persephone from the underworld, like spring from winter, like life from apparent death, ready to begin again, to grow and bloom and reach toward the light. Sleep now, child of earth and sky, child of light and darkness. The pomegranate seeds have been eaten. The binding is complete. But the binding is also a promise, a guarantee that what descends will rise again, that what sleeps will wake, that what appears to end will be renewed. You are safe in the arms of the darkness, protected by the queen who rules there, watched over by the mother who waits above, ready to celebrate your return when dawn comes and you open your eyes and ascend once more into the light. May your dreams be populated with flowers and darkness both, with joy and sorrow intertwined, with the bittersweet beauty of existence lived fully in both worlds, comfortable in neither, essential to both. Like Persephone herself, the eternal queen, the eternal maiden, the goddess who stands at the threshold between life and death and shows us that the boundary is not a wall, but a door, not an ending, but a transition, not a tragedy, but simply another phase of an eternal cycle that turns and turns and never stops turning. If you have found comfort in this ancient story, if these myths have helped guide you toward peaceful rest, please consider subscribing to Myth Drifting for more journeys into the stories that shaped human understanding of the cosmos and our place within it. Let these tales be your companions as you drift into sleep, their wisdom seeping into your dreams like rain into thirsty earth. Sleep well, and may you dream of eternal spring even in winter's heart, of reunion after separation, of light that persists even in darkness, of love that survives even death, of cycles that turn and bring us back, always back, to the people and places and moments we cherish most.